In this video, we'll be exploring Carl Jung's idea, the transcendent function, what it is and how we might begin to utilize this idea, this technique for ourselves. Exploring the esoteric, journeying through the imaginal, expanding consciousness. I'm Lewis, and this is Pneumanosophy Academy. If you're new here, do subscribe and click that bell so you don't miss anything. The term transcendent function first appears in a paper written by Carl Jung in 1916, which is towards the tail end of his so-called creative illness phase, in which he was confronting his own unconscious. This is when he was writing Liber Novus, known as the Red Book. So this is a few years after his infamous break with Sigmund Freud. Though the paper was written in 1916, however, it was actually unknown and unpublished. It just sat in a file somewhere in Zurich until the last few years of Jung's life, when it was ultimately discovered, translated into English, and found its way into his collective works, Volume 8. That was in 1958. The term transcendent function, then, concerns the natural interplay which takes place between our conscious psyche and our unconscious psyche. There are several ways to glean information from the unconscious psyche, and one such way, developed by Jung, was his technique, active imagination. And if you stick around to the end of this video, I'll go through that technique with you. The transcendent function is really at the heart of Jung's depth psychology. It is his attempt to explain the interchange of information and images between the consciousness and the unconscious, between the known and the unknown. The transcendent function is a logical progression in Jung's thinking. He'd already established the existence of and the significance of the unconscious, comprising the personal and the collective. But what now? How do we work with this unconscious content? What would the result be of an interplay? What would the result be of the unification of these opposites? The method then concerns processing a symbol that has arisen out of the unconscious, accessed either through dreams or through active imagination or through something like automatic writing. We're being alert and receptive to that content. So we begin by getting ourselves familiar with it, by recording the symbol, the content, in some manner, in writing it down, in drawing, in painting, in sculpting, or in movement. And we're taking this content to be, this symbol to be, an expression of a complex fact that is not yet apprehended by our consciousness. So once we have this content literally concretized in some sense before us, we can begin to consciously engage with this content from the unconscious. So we start by simply considering what comes to mind. We allow the symbol to impregnate us. We sit with the symbology. We allow the symbol to confront us. So we're open to it. You could almost say that we form a sort of relationship with that symbol. We're open to the possibility that there is insight, that there is benefit to be gleaned from engaging with this symbol. The confrontation of these two opposite positions generates a tension charged with energy that ultimately creates a living third thing, the transcendent function, a movement out of the suspension between these opposites, bringing us towards a new level of being, a process which Jung would later describe as individuation. And that's actually it. We uncover the unconscious content, we concretize it, and then we actively engage with it until that engagement between, that confrontation between the conscious and the unconscious yields forth the third, that insight, that new way of being, whatever it is. But it all starts with accessing that content in the first place. And one such method that I've already mentioned is active imagination. And so, as promised, I'll go through that technique with you all. Active imagination is a practice that we find being utilized by many different people in many different ways. Some that come to mind is Emanuel Swedenborg with his visions of heaven and hell, the Theosophists like Helene Blavatsky and later figures like Rudolf Steiner, and even the English Romantics like Samuel Taylor Coleridge, though admittedly that was also aided with the use of opium. But for our purposes, we are focusing on the technique as it was taught and utilized by Carl Jung himself. And Jung did caveat this practice with a health warning. He believed there was a danger in letting the unconscious run riot in this way. It can be overwhelming, especially if you've had no experience entering different states of consciousness. And this is where working with an analyst may be of some benefit. Active imagination then entails provoking fantasies to come forth in a wakened state. That might be images, narratives, or even personalities, characters coming forth and engaging with us. So we might, for instance, have a single image that we can recall from a dream that we've had. We might use this image as a starting point. We bring it to mind, we focus on it until it does something on its own, until it acts autonomously. Maybe the image changes, or it expresses something to us, or it speaks to us in some new sense. But what's important is that it's coming up and out of the unconscious, and it's only being observed by us consciously, by our ego. We're not imposing upon the image our own ideas or baggage, and equally, we're not just dismissing any content which does come forth. So it's, if you like, a different level of consciousness. There's our everyday autopilot kind of thoughts, but we can choose to let that go and enter into a more receptive state in which we observe what comes forth, what rises up. And then, of course, everything I've already covered can follow, the concretizing and then the engagement with these symbols. If you would like to continue exploring Carl Jung's depth psychology, then do click here where you'll find another video explaining his theory on synchronicity. See you next time.